I will also speak about utopia and dystopia, but in a very different context, although there will be common threads. I will be talking about one of the hot topics that are now on the agenda, that have been now for quite some time on the agenda of the European Union, and that is solidarity. There is a shared understanding that we need more solidarity in the common European asylum system, and that the failures of the common European asylum system in 2015 and 16 have been largely the result of a lack of solidarity. In actual fact, many of the states who engaged in practices that has been then described as waving through, etc., did so also because they knew that, as the Advocate General put it in an old case, Simade and Gisti, the burden would lay where it fell. So they made sure that it didn't fall on their doorstep, right? So we need to have more solidarity, more predictable solidarity schemes between the member states, and this is a very good thing, there is a common understanding that this is required. Now, what I would question, however, is the direction we are taking, the model of solidarity we are heading towards. And let me take it from, the Dublinist of the situation will have a tendency to take it from Dublin. There is this old saying that somebody with a hammer in hand sees nails everywhere. But in this case, it is true that much of the debate on solidarity is located around the discussion on the reform of the Dublin system, meaning the discussion on how do we share asylum responsibilities in Europe. Of course, there are other important arenas, but I don't have the time to address them. And we have now two important documents on the table, the Commission proposal and the European Parliament report that was adopted in late 2017. And these are two very different documents. I mean, whereas the Commission approach is based on dissuasion, if you make secondary movements, we will punish you. It is based on the curtailment of procedural rights, less appeal rights, for instance. And whereas the European document is a lot more based on the idea that you have to give positive incentives to the actors to cooperate, and that you have to have more financial solidarity, there is one point that the two documents have in common. And that is that eventually they both aim to establish a system of quota-based distribution of applicants. In one case, it's a corrective mechanism. In the other case, it's the default mechanism in case that there is no real genuine link between the applicant and the member states. But if the past tells us anything about what the future could be, well, we can think about those models as being predominantly quota-based models. Now, quota-based models, meaning that we take, you have, sorry for the terminology, a stock of asylum applicant every year, and you share them out among the member states. You say, well, there will be 50,000 going there, there will be 25,000 there, there will be 4,000 there, according to GDP, according to the population of the states. It looks wonderful on paper. It's a great way of sharing all the costs that are involved in the asylum sector, because you share the applicants themselves. So you share out in this way reception cost, you share out processing cost, everything, right? It seems to be the perfect model. Except that everything we know and everything we learned in the past 20 years about how the Dublin system worked, and also in the past 2 years about how relocation worked, is that it can't work. It's not feasible in the very first place. And to understand this, you have to understand one important thing at the beginning. Systems of this kind would rely on massively more transfers than we have now. And you also have to start from the premise that most of these transfers would be involuntary. They would be without the consent of the person in question. You cannot make sharing out depending on the consent of persons. That's a key premise of the whole system. If, you know, Estonia has to take, I don't know, 6,000 persons, 6,000 persons have to be sent there, if they, whether they want it or not, right? So at the core, you have a system that will work on a lot more transfers than now, transfers which in their majority will be involuntary as it is the case now. Now, let's make a bit of math. I've read somewhere in the folds of the Commission proposal down in the budgetary aspects that nobody looks at, there is an estimate of 150,000 to 200,000 transfers per year. Okay, the idea is, yeah, if we do the corrective mechanism, there will be 150,000 persons to be transferred or 200,000. And if you look at the EP model, well, since it's not a corrective but a permanent system, you can expect that the numbers would be higher. Of course, it would depend on how many applicants come to Europe, right? But it would be a large proportion. Let's take those figures as a starting point. Now, in the past years, I'm taking averages over a long period of time. The Dublin system has produced about 40,000 transfer decisions, and the implementation has been about 13,000 per year, okay? So let's add to this number the number of, let's be generous and put relocation in the same basket. Relocation was a completely different ball game on the ground. It happened to be, matchmaking made it largely voluntary, etc. But let's, for the sake of the argument, put the relocated in the same basket. The basket of our current transfer capacity, okay? In the best months, I'm not taking the whole period, I'm taking the best period, relocation has been moving around 2,000 persons per month, okay? Projected over a year, 24,000. Now let's do our math. We have now a capacity of about 37,000 transfer per year, tops. Tops, because we should have the system would have produced a lot more transfer if capacity had followed. Or to put it differently, the member state should have, all through this time, transferred a lot more persons, but they managed to transfer about 37,000, okay? How do we go from 37,000 to 200,000? What is gonna make this change happen? Divine intervention? Or some other external force? We don't know. You would expect that this would have been a central theme examined in those documents, but it's not. Not to my knowledge. I mean, I will certainly be corrected later on. But the impression is that the presumption was it will work. How? This is a relevant question. I don't think I'm not. I mean, I probably miss some aspects, but I would like to be convinced that I'm missing some aspects. And so far, I've seen no evidence pointing to the fact that we would be able to implement such a massive transfer-based system. Philippe, do I still have 5 minutes?
Yes.
Good. If we go from feasibility to desirability, now that's also an interesting point to consider, because again, on paper, we all want more solidarity, right? I've been told, well, when you say that these schemes cannot work, you're actually against solidarity. No, I think that you need a lot more solidarity. There are different forms. Let's again start working out the implication of a system that should move hundreds of thousands of persons, or at least tens of thousands of persons against their will every year. Now, the immediate implication here has been pointed out by the European Court of Justice in the relocation case. It's banal. If you have a system of involuntary transfer, you need to have a right to appeal. Whereas if you move a person with his or her consent, that's not necessary. But if you take a person and you say, you go to that state without her consent, you need to have appeal rights. Okay? And actually, you need a lot more than that. You need a lot of due process guarantees. You need a right to be heard, etc., etc. You need formal decisions. You need the whole apparatus that we now have in Dublin 3, actually. We know how it looks like, right? And if you are to move tens of thousands of persons against their will every year, you will also need a lot of coercion. You will need detention system, you will need to have escorted transfers. It's interesting, when reading the reports about Dublin, practically all the few transfers that they managed to implement are implemented by escorted transfers, okay? Now, all of this has got a cost. It's got a cost in monetary terms, it's got a cost in terms of time. Already now, Dublin procedures have bloated to the point that they sometimes last more than refugee status determination. They have a cost in complexity. You need to hire interpreters, you need to hire medical staff, you need to put, you know, authorities in contact with themselves. It's already very complex, costly, and lengthy now that we have 13,000 Dublin transfers per year. How will it look when we have 150,000 to implement? So instead of having responsibility allocation that leads quickly and economically to the asylum procedure, you basically have a system, an outgrowth of our responsibility, of our refugee status determination that suffocates the refugee status determination system. Because lots of resources that should be devoted to ascertaining whether persons are in need of protection and to give them reception, and in case they have to be sent back, to send them back, will instead be devoted to sending persons around Europe. Okay? Is that desirable? I don't think so. By the way, a footnote. The Commission proposal includes a very simple response to this complex problem. And I heard a Commission representative a few days ago saying, well, in Dublin we have a problem, too many appeals. Too many appeals. So the solution is let's curtail the right to appeal instead of, you know, reducing the causes of the appeals. Now, the problem with this is that it is for a large part impermissible, and for the remaining part, it's self-defeating, because the more your decisions are legally shaky because there has not been interpretation, there has not been due process rights, etc., the more they will be contested in court. So actually, there is no shortcut. The only way you can go is to reduce the amount of friction that is generated by the system. Now, how do we do this? That's a very complicated question, and I do not presume to have, you know, the solutions in my pocket. But one possible direction of reform would be to de-emphasize the physical responsibility allocation and to re-emphasize the importance of this. Here I'm borrowing from Violetta, from Elspeth Guild, who is sitting somewhere here, who is there, from others. We should emphasize the effort to reduce the aggregate expenses, reduce the aggregate effort that is generated by our asylum system, and which means having a system that does not rely on coercive transfers on a large scale. Of course, this will leave some states more exposed. There will be applicants who claim asylum in some states, not in others. And of course, those states will be distributively disadvantaged. How do we avoid this problem? How do we tackle this problem? You can do this by, first of all, massively boosting financial solidarity. Basically, all the expenses that member states engage in for the benefit of all the other member states, refugee status determination, returns, and let's enlarge this to border control, etc., are public service expenses that ought to be on the EU budget. They ought not to be on the Italian, Greek, Maltese budget. And that would already change the game to a large extent. And then as for distributing persons, you can try to have incentives to do this. You can have responsibility based on genuine links. That's the direction the EP has engaged in. You can have quotas that are mandatory for states, but which are seen as open places for refugees. This is de facto the way. This will not achieve perfect distribution, because perfect distribution is utopian or dystopian, as I tried to point out. But this will help in spreading the effort. So these are the few thoughts I had to devote to the issue. My impression is we are heading towards a system that accentuates, aggravates the problems that we already know from 20 years of Dublin experience. And my impression is that if we really want to turn the tide, we want to solve those problems, there is quite a lot of thinking that we need more and forward rather than simplistic systems based on sharing people. Thank you.